Well, good morning. From St. Bart's on Park Avenue. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar here, and it is my joy and delight, whether you're joining us here in person or online at stbarts.org, to welcome you to the forum where each week we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. And it is my delight this morning not only to welcome all of you, but also to welcome our esteemed guest, the Reverend Dr. Ayla Lepine, who is Associate Rector of our sibling partner Link Parish in London, St. James's Piccadilly. It seems like you've been here forever now because you've done so many different things this week. Some of you were here for her lecture on Wednesday night. Some of you went to MoMA with us on Friday. Ayla is speaking not once, not twice, not three times, but 4 times today. She's already preached at our 9 a.m. service. She's offering the forum today. She'll be preaching at 11 for those of you who missed her at 9. And then she'll be giving a presentation after the 11 a.m. service during coffee hour on St. James's. But we thought for the forum today, since it is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday, that she would talk about something else she knows a lot about, which is racial justice in the visual arts, and specifically look at examples across both sides of the Atlantic. So I, for one, am excited to hear from her today. Ayla, thank you for this wonderful visit. Thank you for all that you've done, and thank you for being with us this morning.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you all. I've seen over the last few days that there is such a heartfelt hospitality, such a quality of community in and around St. Bart's. And I'd like to take this opportunity especially to thank the Reverend Peter Thompson for everything that you have done to make this possible. There have been so many emails flying around, so many logistical things that happen behind the scenes, including even printing this off at 8 o'clock this morning. No detail has been left unattended to. And the whole team here, clergy, laity, members of the congregation, members of staff, have extended a welcome which is stellar, which is also, I feel, irrepressible. There's something about the quality of this community and its sense of joy in the gospel and wanting to be together, which has been hugely inspiring for me already in these past few days. And as Peter mentioned, genuinely, I feel like I've been here forever. Wow, hopefully in a pleasant way for you. I don't know. Don't worry. I'm going back to London quite early on Wednesday morning. So if you're like, we've had enough of this woman, especially by 1:30 this afternoon, if you're, following this along through the course of your Sunday, you're going to be really tired of hearing from me by lunchtime. And similarly, especially for the more pastoral among you, if you notice that by coffee hour, I look like I'm going to wobble a little bit, I love coffee. I take it with milk, no sugar. So what a joy it is to be here with all of you, and an honor and a privilege, especially on this auspicious and powerful and profound day where the church remembers, celebrates, gives thanks for, and attempts once again to walk in the example of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And as Peter explained, inspired by him, I wanted to explore some art historical examples this morning with you in the forum that might spark our imagination directly and indirectly in relation to what King stood for and the way in which we can continue to walk together, hoping for a better world, imagining a better world, and then not just hoping or imagining, but working to make it so. And all of the 3 artists that I'll be sharing with you today, some of whom or all of whom might be familiar to you, or some of whom or all of whom might be unfamiliar and new to you, and it doesn't matter. You don't need to have a degree in art history, and you don't need to be an expert in Edmonia Lewis to participate, to have questions, to be part of this discussion this morning. I really hope that we might see through the course of the morning that each of these artists is also an activist, is also, I would even say, a theologian. They were, in their way, preaching with, as we'll see, 20th century prints, 19th century sculpture, and 21st century painting. In the United States, in Rome, in Italy, and in Trinidad, where this Trinidad artist, Che Lovelace, has created works of art for my home parish and for your sibling link partner parish, St. James's Piccadilly, so please do come and see them. You can learn about them online. He's created 4 beautiful, stunning works of art in relation to another historical figure who inspires us today, who I'll be preaching about this morning as well. Those of you who are at the 9 o'clock, you've heard some of this. Kwabna Ottaba Kugwano, baptized at St. James's Church in Piccadilly in London 251 years ago. So this project is very precious to us, and I hope also a deep art historical intervention, a deep contemporary, vibrant intervention in what must be an ongoing conversation about not just the relationship between faith and the arts, but also about the relationship between the human heart, our minds, our bodies, our souls, and what it really means to seek justice today and to proclaim it in the world, and to do so with boldness and courage, bringing the best of what we have. Whether you're an artist or not, each and every one of you has a ministry, has gifts to share. And today especially, I hope that each and every one of us can bring the best of what we have, our vocation, whatever it is, into that process. And it's very much an ongoing process that moves towards liberation. That, as Martin Luther King Jr. said himself, that bends towards justice. That's our hope. So let us all, through this experience today and to our ongoing experiences of Christ in our lives, bend a little more towards justice together. Just so I know, how many of you are familiar with the 19th century sculptor Edmonia Lewis? How many of you have heard of this person? That's wonderful. We have a few hands, which is great, but Lewis's work is also unfamiliar to a number of people here in the room, and it's really helpful for me to know that, because if everybody's hands had shot up and they could tell me lots of details about her life as an artist, I would start in a different place. So Edmonia Lewis has simultaneously an indigenous and an African diaspora background. And she was really good at supporting people's understanding not only of her work, but also of her autobiography. She spoke about herself and, if you like, her origin stories as an artist a lot of the time. And one of the stories is that she was in Boston. She was, a deeply heartfelt person who was focusing on the relationship between arts and justice and women's lives right from the beginning. And she saw a sculpture of Benjamin Franklin. And she wasn't necessarily, though perhaps she was at other times, inspired by Franklin's example in the world, and in particular in the American world, in the early moments of the United States. She was inspired by the sculpture itself, and she looked up at the sculpture and she said, "I'm going to make these." For a woman of color in 19th century America, that it would even occur to her to look up at these monumental public figures, these extraordinary sculptures, and think, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Surprising, to say the least. And she realized that the best place to make sculpture and to be taken seriously as a sculptor was Rome. And so she moved to Rome. And one of the challenges for her is that because she was a black woman, a number of people didn't believe that she was actually making the sculptures herself. And so she worked harder in her studio than many others, even women, who were amongst that group of artists in Rome in the 19th century, and was eager to demonstrate, because she needed to demonstrate, that it was her work, that it really was possible. So even in the lack of belief, the lack of imagination, regardless of what she made or what she said, there is racism right at the heart of the way that she is being experienced in the world as a human being and in relation to what she makes. She was a prolific sculptor, and she actually got her start at Oberlin. And there's a whole story about her life at Oberlin College as well that I won't go into right now, but if you are interested later on, feel free. And you can see a work of art by her, an early work, in an exhibition in New York right now at the new museum that is a really incredible curated exhibition celebrating the life and work of Judy Chicago, the feminist artist. And one of the floors in the new museum features 90 works of art by women across many, many centuries. And especially considering that we are a Christian community together, I was shocked when I visited this place yesterday and realized that it's a chapel. It's a chapel. There's an altar with an altarpiece. There's a huge, vibrant manuscript of Hildegard von Bingen in a case being celebrated in relation to this chapel space in a contemporary art museum. And I cried, and then I took some pictures. So, you know, if you want to I'm not going to say that you're going to have that kind of overwhelming spiritual, emotional experience. You know, you have your own experience. But I would recommend taking some pictures because it's not going to be around forever. And on the walls, amongst these extraordinary women, there is a drawing by Edmonia Lewis. So you can go and check it out. It won't be there forever either. And what she's famous for are these monumental sculptures. Here is the death of Cleopatra in the center, and an image called the Old Arrow Maker, which is related to Longfellow's Hiawatha, which was absolutely everywhere in the 19th century. So she's interacting with this perception that so many white writers and white people have about indigenous experience, about the experiences of people of color, and she's bringing it round to a new way of experiencing sculpture as a Black woman in her own time. And I'd like to show you briefly what the label looks like now in the museum next to the Old Arrow Maker, that figure that I've just shown you on the left. The label begins with Mississauga Ojibwe, which, in relation to Edmonia Lewis's indigenous heritage, is a really interesting thing to do. And then the next section of the label is in English. I was speaking about this with a group of theologians in London recently, and in the Q&A afterwards, this really cool, interesting thing happened where someone noticed that in the artist language label, it begins with her name, Edmonia Lewis. And then in the English label, why? You know, own goal, everybody. It begins with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's name and the way in which she is responding to the poem. And I was so grateful for that insight from my priest colleague at St. Martin in the Fields a couple of months ago, because I thought, oh my gosh, this is so important. So even when museums are trying to decolonize or trying to reconsider work by people like Edmonia Lewis, there's still some distance to travel. This is her image of Hagar. Hagar is here in the moment of communicating with God. We don't see an angel, we don't see Ishmael, we don't really see an indication of the wilderness around her. This is a moment in Hagar's existence where she is recognizing that her interaction with God means that she gets to give God a name, which is a pretty intense thing to do. It is an extraordinary thing to do. The way in which she is claiming God for her own, even in this moment of desperation, is something that the Black woman liberation theologian Dolores Williams picks up on and works with in the deepest possible ways in order to get us to a new place. Not only in terms of Black liberation theology, she was very concerned about a lot of the things that James Cone had to say and really wanted to bring out womanist experience. Again, if you want to know about that, that's a ... We can talk about it afterwards if you wish. Because she's like, look, if you focus on, especially Hagar, and Black women's interaction with God, then we're going to get to a different place in terms of the shared vision of liberation together. So look at this, look at her. And I'm kind of excited in a project that I'm working on now that Dolores Williams as a theologian is an absolute classic in that incredible generation, including Kelly Brown Douglas and others. But she doesn't, because that's fine, she doesn't want to. She's pointing in another direction. She doesn't really talk about art. And so I think, well, this is exciting because there's an opportunity here to incorporate art by people like Edmonia Lewis into having another experience of what Hagar is like, how she can be claimed, and what that's like. Another interesting thing about this, though, of course, is that Hagar here is white marble, which is part of the sculptural tradition inherited through the Western European canon. White marble. That's fascinating too. So she's incorporating herself into what is expected in, if you like, her white European, North American artistic world. And she also, I would argue, is subverting it, is doing something different with it by saying, who do you think Hagar is? Well, that's who I think she is. And just to give you an example of how Hagar has been treated in Western art by others, very, very typical stuff here. So in Italian, French, and British art, Maffei and Claude on the right, and then Benjamin West on the left. And I'm not going to get into any of this with you, but I'm just showing you the kind of artistic traditions, the atmosphere into which Edmonia Lewis as an artist steps, what she's doing that's new and different and interesting in terms of the world that she is in. And I wonder, perhaps this is something for discussion afterwards, what you make of Hagar, her character here, how this sculpture makes you feel. It's in the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and I was in Washington a few days ago, and I wrote to the curator, I wrote to Karen, and I said, do you think it's possible for me to come and see this, because it's in storage, it's really complicated, it's in storage. And she said, this takes ages to be able to make a journey into storage, because it's just a complicated thing to do. And perhaps we can have a conversation at another time, because she is working on an exhibition which will be at the Smithsonian focusing on work by people like Edmonia Lewis in 2025. So book that Amtrak ticket now. And actually, that would be an amazing parish trip. That's something to consider, that St. Bart's could go and experience this and think about this together and think about this in context. So here's another example of Edmonia Lewis's work, Forever Free. There's a lot that could be said about gender with this. This is a complicated image. And there's a sense of self-determinant agency, but where the shackles of enslavement are still present. If you imagine what this sculpture would be like without that attribute, it would look different, it would feel different. It would be perhaps less convicting. It might mean that we would approach it in a different way. But she's saying, no, remember, these are shocking, strong weapons of torture. Still there. The legacy is still there, whether we can see them or not. And I'm showing you an example of Josiah Wedgwood's famous 18th century little brooch, a kind of medal that people would wear in order to demonstrate their abolitionist sensibilities. Am I not a man and a brother? There are many examples of this. And there's a lot of art historical discussion about this kneeling figure and the supplicatory idea of this figure in relation, potentially, to white saviorism. So there's a lot to say about this here. But there is also a tradition of abolitionist images where there is a yearning as well as an expectation for the chain-breaking freedom. But who will do this and how it will work is something that Edmonia Lewis is thinking about, for sure, on the left. And so that's the context within which we might be exploring Hagar together. Let's fast forward through time in America. Sister Corita Kent was a nun, and she taught at the Immaculate Heart Art College in Los Angeles. Some of you may have heard of her. She's getting an increasing amount of attention. It was very cool to see a work of hers on the wall at MoMA and to explore that with some of you on Friday morning. And she did a whole series called Heroes and Sheroes in the late 1960s. Focusing on her contemporary world. And she often did this with her prints, where she would take images from newspapers. This is a very famous image that goes around the world of Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife at his funeral in mourning. And so here, she's using different fonts, different colors, in order to really highlight what Coretta Scott King had to say in relation to the shock and the horror of Martin Luther King Jr.'s death. I challenge you today to see that his spirit never dies, and that we go forward from this time, which to me represents the crucifixion, onto a redemption and a resurrection of the Spirit. One thing to notice here is that black is so beautiful that it doesn't fit within the scale of her print. It's not that she can't scale down, of course she could. But my belief here is that she's like, no. It's more beautiful than we could ever ask or imagine. It doesn't fit within those confines. It's something that we need to see and explore differently. And Corita Kent was involved absolutely in the civil rights movement and in that struggle, as well as protesting against the Vietnam War and many other very, very radical stances that she took together with people like Dan Berrigan and other radical Catholics in that moment. Notice too that crucifixion is the only word in red. You will notice today in our services that the clergy are wearing red vestments. And we use red in the church really for two things: for the idea of the reality of the fire of the inspiration of the Holy Spirit in our lives, so you'll see red at Pentecost. And you'll also see red when we remember someone who died, especially those who died filled with the faith of God and died because they would not be silent. And so there she is, with crucifixion in red. Do not forget that the blood of Christ poured out for all is a moment of sacrificial love which transforms all life forever and ever. And one of the things that I just learned in our 9 a.m. service, because I have never seen Canon Stephanie preside at the altar before, and you do a thing that I've never seen or heard anybody else do. I don't mean to put you on the spot here at all, but it was, oh no, you're gonna love it. It's fine. Don't worry. Where what I'm used to is a prayer concluding with Amen, and everybody going, Amen. At least in terms of what I heard, there's a kind of question mark of consent, or at least that's how I felt it, how I heard it, which is incorporated into what you do. And I am going to change as a priest and as a human being in this world because of the resurrection of Christ and because of the consensual reality of the body of Christ. I'm going to change my amen. Right on, yes. And I want us to do it together now because this is holy language from Coretta Scott King. Amen?
Amen. It works.
I've never done that before, and it's like, it's a thing. It's a thing in our sibling partner link experience with St. James's Piccadilly. And I suspect perhaps if the rector is not watching now, she will watch it later. Lucy, my amen is going to change because of the influence of these wonderful people in Manhattan, and Ken and Stephanie in particular. So here's the context for Corita Kent. Here's another example where she's looking at Martin Luther King and divine order radiating from kings and gods. So there's that nice wordplay there. It may get me crucified, I may even die, but I want it said that he died to make men free. And that was a shockingly strange, uncanny, horrific prophetic moment in his speech, which of course in 1969, only months after King's death, Corita Kent knew, remembered, and then incorporated into her image about the crucifixion and resurrection of the Spirit. And just to give you a sense of how else she's reacting to the contemporary world, this is a very famous image, again from a newspaper, of Dan and Phil Berrigan burning draft cards with homemade napalm. The FBI were not excited about that. They did not think that that was a particularly delightful or obedient thing for them to do, and as a result, they got in major trouble. And again, if you want to talk about that later, we can. And here are some images of Corita Kent at work in the art studio, and they had this amazing thing called Mary's Day, where they had this massive pageant, and people were carrying these homemade signs like a sort of extraordinary, joyful festival protest. And I wonder what it would feel like amongst peace and give us our daily bread. What would it feel like for you to carry a massive pink sign that says, God likes me? Personally, I would find that very uncomfortable, and I don't think I'd want to do it. I don't know why. That probably has something to do with my own, I need to speak to my spiritual director about that. I'll get myself sorted out. But I think it's a really powerful thing to proclaim that the love of God and the liking of God, that the generous hospitality of God is true. And she compared the Blessed Virgin Mary to a tomato. So I'll just leave that hanging there. It's one of her most famous works. It's called The Juiciest Tomato of All, because she was really interested in commercial slogans all around her. And Del Monte, tinned fruit and vegetables, they had a campaign at the time where they were saying, as a sort of slogan, our tomatoes are the juiciest. And so Corita Kent thought, okay, fine, if like a tomato is a juiciest thing according to an American corporation, then surely the Mother of God is the juiciest tomato of all. Imagine the whole of the transformative reality and power of the incarnation of Christ being contained within her womb. Now that is a tomato beyond the imagination. And of course, she got in terrible trouble for that. And she was interested in the Eucharist as well. And so here she's looking at Wonder Bread packaging. And the Wonder Bread slogan is helps build strong bodies 12 ways. Does Christ not do that with the apostles? Right? And so Corita Kent's kind of leaning in. This is not necessarily a protest against Wonder Bread, but she found Wonder Bread to be a wonderful opportunity because she saw the Eucharist everywhere, because she was filled with the love of God. And so everything she sees, like we do, I hope, is through the lens of faith. Try it. The next time you go to, I don't know, Trader Joe's or Whole Foods or whatever you like, look at the packaging theologically. You can do it. Honestly, you can do it. And see what happens. Something will happen, because the persuasive language of capitalism is sometimes not that far away, weirdly enough, from the persuasive language of the things that actually really matter. So if you want to transform your shopping experience into looking for things that actually matter, I warmly recommend that you try it. I'm not saying like, well, maybe I am trying to disruptively, if not destroy capitalism today with all of you. To those of you who are watching from St. James's Piccadilly, I'm just being myself. You're used to this. I think it's so precious to be able to question what we're being sold. What are we being sold in church? Because sometimes church is a destructive force of selling in different ways. So think of someone like Isaiah. Come, buy without money. There's this incredible open feast. Think of the altar and the Eucharist. We're not being sold anything. We're just being offered something. All things come from you, O God, and of your own do we give you. That's the lens through which Corita Kent is doing what she's doing. And this is in MoMA. This is a photo that I took the other day. I should like to be able to love my country and still love justice. That's a quote from Albert Camus, who Corita Kent quoted from a lot. And this is part of a series of alphabet letters. They have the whole 26 in MoMA's collection, which is sometimes referred to as damn everything but the circus, which is a really interesting idea, because there's a quality then of thinking about language as a sort of playful circus itself, and thinking about the idea of pageant, entertainment, freedom in a way which is really subversive. And what do we mean when we talk about circus? Remember, she sees the world Eucharistically, the phrase bread and circuses, as a kind of distracting entertainment for the people that pulls us away from the things that matter, so she's pulling us back into the things that matter in a very playful way. And so finally I turn to the example of Kwabna Adaba Kugwano, who, in connection to our Eucharist today, to the readings that are set, and to the history and to the vibrant example of Martin Luther King Jr. today, who I'm focusing on in my preaching with you, an abolitionist, an activist, the author of Thoughts and Sentiments on the Evil of Slavery, who was baptized at St. James's Piccadilly 251 years ago. And one of the things that I love about this rough stone, the way that it looks like it's been cut out roughly of a fragment, is that it reminds us that his life, infinite and precious, is incorporated into millions of lives. And those millions of lives looked very, very different depending on whose side you were on in terms of love and justice, depending on the significance of the relationship between the infinite blessedness of every human being and the brutal reality of transatlantic chattel enslavement, which Kugwano endured. And if you imagine that this, which is now there, that's being blessed by the amazing Bishop Rosemary Mallett, who is the Bishop of Croydon in South London in the Diocese of Southwark. That is Reverend Lucy Winkett, the Rector of St. James's behind her, who was celebrant that day. And then we have Graham and a couple of other servers just there. And this is our font at St. James's. That is the font that Kugwano was baptized in. And then there is the plaque. And the plaque has that beautiful undulating roughness to it And if you imagine that you kind of imagine you could put it on the floor and look at it from a bird's eye view. Is that not the rough waves of the Atlantic, rendered in stone, with his name carved across it, incised deeply into it? And alongside that, here are these works of art now at St. James's by Che Lovelace, this artist from Trinidad who interacted with the story of Cugoano and then did his own thing. So they have titles: Passage, Spirit, River, and Vision of the Birds. So this experience of the ritual of water at this turning point in the day, the rising of the sun, the dawning of Christ's light, the freedom of these beautiful birds, which are also a symbol of resurrection and eternity, as well as being a symbol of Trinidad itself. And what I'll share with you, just by way of conclusion, is that I brought a group of teenagers to see these a little while ago. And those teenagers come from all over the world. They're from a local school in our neighborhood. And they were about 14, I guess, and we talked about the history of Cugoano in relation to the church, and then I brought them all into the narthex. And these paintings are really big. And when you look up, you cannot help but see them. They hold the building, and they're the first thing that you see as you come into the church. And that was our Christmas card this year, by the way, because we thought we want to tell the story of Cugoano at every moment we can. So this was our Christmas card this year. So these teenagers, they looked up, and I said, "What do you see?" And I asked them to pay attention and to just, sort of quietly be with these images for a while. And this one young person said, "I can see a different vision for people in Africa in Cugoano's time if that horrible, violent transatlantic trade had never existed. I can see a different past as well as a different future. And I carry the insight of that 14-year-old with me. And it's changing the way that I see these, and perhaps now changing the way that you see these too." I'm going to stop there, and I look forward to having a time of discussion with you, and I hope that those of you who are joining us online are able to contribute as well. And it's just really special to be here. Really, really lovely. So thank you very much for the invitation, and I look forward to hearing from you and being in dialogue this morning.
Thank you so much, Ayla. We have a few minutes for questions. If you're here in the room, Natalie Johnson has question cards. Just raise your hand and she'll bring them around to you. If you're joining us online, you can type your questions into the live chat on YouTube, the comments on Facebook, or you can email me, pthompson@stbarts.org. And email works if you're in the room too and want to cut the line. So, Ayla, as we're waiting for the questions, it's remarkable that you managed to tackle the themes of the day, introduce St. James's, and talk about something from your own area of expertise all in one presentation. That's wonderful. We're not used to thinking about this day, which is a federal holiday in the US, from a transatlantic perspective. And yet part of the roots of racial injustice in this country is all about that transatlantic trade, as you said. Can you talk about what it's like? And also, you grew up on one side of the Atlantic, you ended up on the other, and you're coming back as a visitor from that other side today. Can you just reflect a little more on that transatlantic word and what kind of insights we as Americans might glean from this Canadian Brit on this day?
And thank you, too, as part of that question, for explaining that, yes, my British accent is terrible, is it not? So I moved from Western Canada, from British Columbia, to the UK 21 years ago. I was going to study theology for just a year, and then I never went home. And the rest is history. Became an academic art historian, and then priesthood has become enfolded into that. And I think that your question is so important, because one of the things that I feel curious about, and that I also feel uncomfortable about, is that we have so many opportunities in Britain to really deeply reckon with the reality of historical and present racism. It won't surprise you that the Church of England is deeply institutionally racist, like many of these institutions are. It won't surprise you that there's a reckoning, that there are processes of many kinds. It probably won't surprise you that across many different iterations of that process and many decades, there have been conversations, reports, recommendations, actions. How much change? How much real, actual change? We have an incredibly long way to go. And so I'm really struck by, honored by, and also, I don't know, I feel like I'm doing my best to carry this today, that I was invited to be your preacher as a white North American who comes from the Church of England today, of all days. And it also reminds me that we do have a number of people of color, extraordinary examples in our lives as Christians, in the calendar in the Church of England. We do not mark Martin Luther King Jr. Day. We do mark abolitionists, including Olaudah Equiano. And his name, if you're not familiar, Google this man, read his book. Powerful figure, one of the sons of Africa alongside Kugwano. Jeremy Clarkson and William Wilberforce. Now, these are key and interesting people in the history of the 18th century abolition movement, for sure. I think it's too easy to just stick with the white story and to say, oh, William Wilberforce, what an incredible human being. Well, there are loads of monuments to William Wilberforce all over the place. Good, fine. But I think it's too easy for us to stick with the white story and stay there. There is no monument in a place of worship to Kwabena Ottaba Kugwano, except the one at St. James's, which was installed in August 2023. And so to me, being here, having the opportunity to be here in relation to that transatlantic history, which I think we have not accounted for in the UK sufficiently, inside or outside the church, is an honor and is also troublesome. And it is good trouble. It's good trouble in me, and I hope that it's good trouble in you.
Can you speak a little bit more about the process that you all at St. James's underwent to recognize Kugwano in this way with the plaque as well as the commission?
Yeah, that process started before I arrived at St. James's. So I started as the associate rector there in summer 2022, and there was already a really vibrant conversation about how this was going to work around the 250th anniversary of Kugwano's baptism. And it was decided that there would be these two things, the plaque, the monument, as well as an intervention by a contemporary artist. The plaque is by the Cambridgeshire workshop, Cardozo Kindersley, who have carved monuments for tons and tons of different places. Westminster Abbey, if you go in, you will see numerous examples by Cardozo Kindersley, as well as in many cathedrals. So that was kind of perhaps taking that tradition of monuments, thinking about contested heritage, which I know is happening here, especially at Washington National Cathedral. I know there's an op-ed piece about that in the Washington Post today. I think that's right. And so that's being enfolded into that moment for sure. And alongside that, there was also an invitation for our creative director at St. James's at the time, Richard Perry, to work together with a curator named Echo Asian, who is an expert on the histories and the contemporary realities of art by Black people. He curated an incredible exhibition at the Hayward Gallery in London called In the Black Fantastic, about Afrofuturism, and so he became our guest project curator. There was a short list of artists, and there was a sort of collaborative process, and we were all like, Che Lovelace, this is it. And I remember the day when, before these were painted, his gallerist, Tommaso Corvimora, and Che came to St. James's Piccadilly to a service, because it's like, you've got to come and see this community in action. And they were like, oh, okay, yeah, this is what we're gonna do. And if you want to know more about the commission, there was a fantastic conversation between Lucy, the rector, and Che at the time that the paintings went up on the wall, and it's online on our YouTube channel at St. James's. So if you want to know more about the work of art in relation to the wider story of the commission, that's definitely where you need to go and take a look.
We have a few questions about Edmonia Lewis. One is, can you tell the story of her at Oberlin?
Oh, geez. Okay, yes. Yeah, I can do that. Shall I do that?
Sure. The other is, did she know the black composer Samuel Coleridge Taylor?
Oh, wonderful question. Okay. Very briefly, and there are really solid, interesting biographies of Edmonia Lewis. She, too, is attracting attention increasingly in a way which is really good to see. So anything that I say, not just because the constraints of time, but because I am not a deeply steeped expert on Edmonia Lewis. I would love to be, but I have not written a book about her. I've not written a dissertation about her. So I'm learning as I go. So please do read more about her if you're interested, and I hope you all are. So Oberlin, she went, and she was accused of stealing something. And she was falsely accused of stealing something. And she had to leave. So that's the brief version of that Oberlin story. So racism takes many forms. And one of the forms that racism took was that. And so one of the things about this new museum exhibition, together with Judy Chicago's holding together of those stories of women, is that I was really moved to see this teenage drawing of, I think it's a Greek goddess, actually, by Edmonia Lewis, thinking, what was she thinking that day in this horribly oppressive space that was filled with educational opportunity and also fraught with danger and violence? What was that like for her that day? So that's the Oberlin thing. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, I don't know whether or not they knew one another. I can't remember his dates. Can someone tell me his dates?
It was about the same.
It's about the same time?
And he was influenced a lot by Hiawatha because before he was.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I would love to know. And one of the things that I think would kind of be cool, just because it would be cool, if it hasn't been done already, is to have, let's say, in the National Gallery of Art exhibition that's coming up, why not perform music by that composer within the exhibition and put those things in dialogue as part of the American experience and as part of honoring people of color and their contributions to culture in America, historically and now. It's a cool idea. I don't know, I could write to someone, I guess. I'm not sure. Maybe they're thinking about it already. That would be really cool.
We have to stop in just a minute because I need to give you just a little bit of a break before the 11 a.m. service. But one final question. On this day that we're contemplating racial justice, there are people at work trying to reverse gains that have been made in DEI initiatives and others. And as someone who's been reflecting on institutional racism in your context as well as ours, can you talk about what our role in the fight might be right now?
Yeah, wow. I can, in a way, only speak personally, as well as to an extent from the perspective of my parish, who I love, and who I do my best to care for and walk with, and from the Church of England, my sort of adopted Anglican communion space. I think one thing that we can do is to name that backward attempt to dismantle those conversations and that action as sinful. I think we need to rise up as Christians and name it as sinful. Talk seriously about the presence of the evil and the violence in the hearts of those who would attempt, in a situation where so little has been done, frankly, to move the needle even further backwards. To just call it what it is, which is flagrant and outrageous injustice. I think it's also a really good idea to listen to people of color and their perspectives and to learn. To read the books that they have written, to spend time with them, and to be able to be in a situation of vulnerability, of being wrong, of not only learning but acting, and as a result then, to continue to make those commitments to being genuine activists while naming that kind of nefarious behavior for what it is.
The Reverend Dr. Ayla Lepine, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. We hope you'll make the short trek over or to the different tab in your browser to join us for worship at 11 a.m. We'll make a quick change and then see you there. And remember, after the 11 a.m. service, if you want to learn more about St. James's, Ayla will be speaking yet again, so she'll be back. So please do come back for that as well.